Okay, good. So let's just summarize where we are essentially, and then we'll continue in the text. I hope you all have the text. I sent it again last night. We're looking here at a dispute, essentially a dispute between the Chachamim. Let's try and keep the Hebrew terms, the Chachamim sages, and Rabbi Gamliel, as recorded in the final Mishnah of Masechta Rosh Hashana. And the basic argument boils down, as we explained, what in Tefillah B'tzibur, what is primary? What is the objective? What's the intent? The tzibur per se, the communal davening, or the shliach tzibur? The Chachamim are of the opinion that the virtue is the tzibur coming together. The role of the shliach tzibur is essentially only to discharge the obligation of prayer for the one who doesn't know how to daven. But all those that do discharge their obligation through their own prayer, but tzibur. Rabbi Gamliel says no, that the main thing is the shliach tzibur. Which begs the question then, as they asked him, the Chachamim asked him, so if the main thing is the shliach tzibur, then all he's got to do is daven. We all come there and listen, and that's the end of the story. Why are we all saying Yamid privately? And his answer to the Chachamim is, we essentially only daven in order that the shliach tzibur should arrange his thoughts and prepare himself for the Amidah, right? This was especially true and necessary then, when there were no there was no printing press, there were no Sidurim, people davening by heart. So the Shliach Tzibur, to think the davening that he's about to say, what he davens privately, to give him a chance to prepare himself. That's the basic discussion, dialogue in the Gemara. We explained that the core essence of this argument is an existential debate as to what is primary, quantity or quality. So according to the Chachamim, it is quantity, hence they say that the virtue of Tefillah B'tzibur is the tzibur. And Rabbi Gamliel says quality. And hence the singular voice of the Shliach Tzibur that embodies them all is of greater virtue. We're not going to repeat all the nuance and insight and explanations that we gave of the last few weeks, just the summary so we can go further. And then we explained that Rabbi Gamliel and the Chachamim are consistent in their positions, as illustrated in the following famous story. And that is, Rabbi Gamliel was the Nasi of his time. The Nasi means the spiritual leader. At that time, there were two leaders for the Jewish people, the Nasi and the Av Bezdin, the head of the court. Rabbi Gamliel was the Nasi, a scion of David HaMelech, spiritual king, as the Nasim were. So when he was Nasi, the Beis Medrash was very limited. He made a rule that only a student that's Teichei Kebaroi may be admitted. Only a student, the Talmud, whose externality, his external appearance, is reflective of his inner appearance. Just to look the part, for that matter, behave the part, but not be the part. So such people are not admitted into his yeshiva. It doesn't mean they didn't learn Torah or couldn't learn Torah elsewhere. This was the yeshiva that formulated halacha. This is where the sages convened. Without repeating the whole story, with him and Rabbi Yeshua, the sages, after a series of events, we explained the story, fascinating period of our history. The sages in our first year decided they have to remove Rabbi Gamliel from his position because the way he treated his colleague Rabbi Yeshua, which is pretty fascinating right there, the democratic element here. Although he inherits this position by virtue of his pedigree, his yichus, and scholarship and piety, but when the sages felt that his leadership was inappropriate, he's removed. In his stead, they appointed Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who makes reference to this whole story in a Mishnah quoted in the Haggadah that we all say. So back to the essential story without repeating all the details again. Forgive me for not repeating it all again. You can listen to it in the earlier shiurim. So when Gamliel was removed from the position of Nasi, so the Gemara says on that day, hundreds of benches were added to the Beis HaMedrash. This restriction that they only admitted, very select students that had to be not just outwardly, but internally and essentially pious and appropriate. So this was lifted. At the end of the story was, as I told you, Rabbi Gamliel was reinstated, and it became then, they didn't remove Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. This year he was only 17 years old and he was appointed, right? That's the reference in the Haggadah there. They didn't remove him, and it was 1 week that each one presided over the proceedings in the yeshiva.
Didn't you say that nobody was admitted? Didn't you say that no one was admitted on if they could still find a way in, then they got in?
No, I just added an insight from one of the Rebbes of Ger.
Okay.
That Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Gamliel had placed a guard at the door and only admitted the ones who were, as we just described, toichei kebaroi. The outside was like the inside. So the Ger Rebbe asked, this was in parenthesis. How did that guardian know? Was he a prophet? A boy comes, a young man comes, and he's a beard, and he's wearing a white shirt and the black pants, and he has no chup. That means there's a short haircut and a black hat and a jacket. So how would he know? And the question is kind of even stronger. He's just a guard. He's a security guy. How would George know? How would George know to admit or not? So that he answered this beautiful answer. He said that actually, he suggested that he didn't let anybody in. And the one who, despite all obstacles, got in, that was indicative that his outside was like his inside. It's a beautiful answer. Well, it's a suggestion. Maybe the Shomer did have Ruach HaKodesh, but it seems unlikely. Why, if he had Ruach HaKodesh, that was his job, to be a Shomer, to be a security guard. It's a beautiful answer. It's a very important and a beautiful lesson. It's a beautiful lesson that it's the obstacles that we overcome that display our inner metal, who we are. When we behave appropriately and the environment is conducive and inviting and welcoming and applauding, no. So you're a nice guy, you're a nice husband, a nice wife, nice father, community member, when everything is supporting you and applauding you. But when there's obstacles and you're rejected and criticized, nope, you don't belong here. And still you persevere, then you're really the real deal. It's a very important, beautiful lesson for one of the Rebbes of Ger. I forgot which one it was. Maybe the Sfas Emes, maybe the Chiddush. At any rate, that was an aside, little explanation. So the whole point of the story, friends, is that what? It's the same thing again. They're consistent with their views. Rabbi Gamliel, as long as he was Nasi, he's looking at quality. It's the same issue. And the sages, the Chachamim, favor quantity. So when he was removed and representative of the sages, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was appointed, so the doors were open and everybody was invited, because quantity is more important than quality. That's where we're up to, minus the nuance. Now we're going to go further. Okay, so friends, please follow along. It's Perek Dalet, or it's called Ois Dalet, chapter 4. Just to speed things up a little bit, I'm not going to read everything in the text and translate. I'll just give you the translation to begin with, and we'll read the salient texts. What the Rebbe is going to explain now is as follows. So here we have two scenarios, two stories, two issues, where the sages, the Chachamim and Gamliel argue, and it comes down to the same point, Eichos versus Kamus. quantity versus quality. So the basic question is that he's addressing now is, if it's the same position, they don't have to state it in both cases. You state it in one instant, we will then deduce from that they're going to hold respectively in another scenario where the same issue is quantity versus quality, they'll be consistent with their views. There's no need to restate their opinion. In other words, after the story, for example, of the Beis Medrash, right, as we just described, so we will know Chachamim hold quality and Gamliel holds quantity. So we would deduce when it comes to Tefillah b'tzibur, what's the main thing? The tzibur or the shliach tzibur. We would deduce that because it's consistent. The fact that they must restate their view means that the cases are not the same. And there's reason to argue that they only state their position in story A and not in B. Because for story B, we would say it's different, and it tells us why. If they said it in story B, we would say only here, but not in story A. It's called v'tzricha. This is Talmudic, razor-sharp thinking. And we need, just one word, and we need the sages, whichever sages that we talk about. This is a common piece of Talmudic thinking. We need the two disputants, wherever they might be, to state their opinion in various subjects, even though it seems on the surface to be the same issue. It's not. As you probe deeper, we'll see that the reasons to say this case is different and therefore it must be restated. That's what we're going to do right now. Are we clear where we're going now? I need a thumbs up, a heads up, a nod, a wink. Yeah, you representing everybody, Alan? Okay. So looking now, if you have the text, Be'inyan Beis Medrash. I think you have the same text as I do, so it's page Ayin Ches. Page Ayin Ches, on the left-hand side, the last two lines. Do you have the right text? No, that's something else entirely. I don't think I made copies. I didn't know you were coming, so I'll have it for next week. Doesn't have to make photocopies, there isn't. So you just listen, and next week, God willing, I will have copies. Huh? Oh, on your phone you can get it. Oh, that yeah. I thought you meant to. Yeah. Okay. So likewise here, in these two scenarios, each one is unique. As we will see, even though on the surface they seem the same. And that's why their positions have to be articulated. Let's have a look. Be'inyan Beis Medrash, in the subject of the school, Beis Medrash. Shemeduber, what's the issue? Gamliel said that she'ein toiche kebaroi, that if he inside, it's not like he's outside, he's not going to be admitted. So we might conclude, what's he saying here? Gamliel is saying that's not a student. He's just not a student. Elsewhere we find a similar statement. Kol Talmud Chacham she'ein toiche kebaroi. Any scholar whose outside behavior does not reflect his inner self, ain't a Talmud Chacham, is not a scholar. Period. It's not missing a component. We're not missing perfection. He's just not a student. So that's why we could think that Gamliel is saying, when it comes to the Beis Medrash, if you're not inside like you're outside, you just don't belong there. But I might think that he would agree on the subject of Tefillah b'tzibur that the main thing is the tzibur. It's not the same. Let's continue. Because when it comes to davening, not the yeshiva, Rabbi Gamliel might agree that when the community davens, there is loyirak mailis akamos. In addition to, obviously, you have the quantity, but he might say, oh, we have there also lagam mailis aichos. There we have a sufficient virtue of quality as well. There's quality. A student who's inside is not like who's outside doesn't reflect his inside. There's no quality at all. Therefore, he's out. But Tefillah b'tzibur satisfies his quest for quality. Why? Even independent of the shliach tzibur. You've got two virtues here. You've got quantity and quality. You might say that's, in this case, we'll go for it. When 10 Jews daven together, this prayer in the brackets called it's each one individually true. We're davening together as a community, the whole community is davening silently, the Amidah. So he might agree that this has this has a virtue over the individual's prayer, no matter who, because you have the many coming together. He would agree. It's true that the quality of the Shliach Tzibur, where they're all one, the whole community coalesces in one entity, it has a greater virtue. That's true. It's true, but nonetheless, you might say that since there is a qualitative virtue to 10 people coming together, again, it's a harmony. The Shliach Tzibur is not a harmony. Shliach Tzibur is a singular voice. But he might agree that a harmony is a qualitative virtue that he would accept as being, and since it has now qualitative and quality, he would agree with the sages. When it comes to the yeshiva, it's all about quality. It's not about harmony. So you've got to be a proper student. If you're not, sorry, it's only quality. But davening is different. Davening, there is the virtue to the many coming together. So there is a virtue to quantity. They create a qualitative, harmonious voice. Shliach Tzibur is singular, but even then there's virtue. So therefore I might think, continue. If Rabbi Gamliel would only stay in this position when it comes to the yeshiva, I would say that, no, it's only then. That's when he is so strict and says it's quality only. Because you don't have the quality, you're just simply not a student. But I might think he would agree in the case, that they wouldn't be arguing in the case of davening. I might think, when it comes to davening, he agrees with the Chachamim, that here I'll agree the community's davening is the main thing. Because you've got two virtues. There's a greater qualitative virtue to this harmonious voice, more than the singular voice. And you also have the virtue of numbers. Numbers and quality coming together. That's great. So he might agree with the Chachamim when it comes to davening. So therefore he has to state his opinion. No, even there, the Shliach Tzibur is the main thing. And the Tzibur only davens to prepare him. The Tzibur only davens to prepare him. So that's why he has to has to articulate his opinion when it comes to davening, because I would not draw the inference. Just because when it came to Torah learning, he said, if you don't have the quality of a student, you don't belong in the Beis Medrash. That does not apply to davening for the reasons we just said. But now go the other way. Now logic says, okay, so just tell us the argument when it comes to what? Davening, and how much more so will I apply it, the sages at least, to Beis Medrash. Let's have a look. On the other hand, if Rabbi Gamliel's opinion would only have been said, in other words, I'm sorry, let's make that clear. Let him just state his argument about davening. It's the Rabbi Gamliel we're talking about. Sorry, Rabbi Gamliel. If when it comes to davening, he still dismisses the value of the communal part, and he says the main thing is the Shliach Tzibur, and the community is only davening that he should be prepared, then for sure we would apply it to what? To the Beis Medrash, right? That's the argument. So let him say in the case. Pardon?
It's the question. I just want to make sure he's saying that
we're going to explain. We're going to explain now why we could not deduce his opinion of the Beis Medrash from his opinion of Tefillah.
I understand, but he's saying that a tibur, meaning a minyan, has less value than a shliach tibur. Like he's saying that the value
of that clearly. He said that clearly. Now we are saying, why does he have to say your opinion twice? Why do you have to, in two scenarios, point out to quantity over quality? We're explaining because the two scenarios are not the same. He would not apply his logic here to here. If he would have said it, I might think that if he didn't say I might think that if he only said it in the case of the yeshiva, I would say that's when he trumpets. That's when he advances, when he argues the virtue of quality. And if the quality isn't there, you don't belong to the Beis Medrash. He would not apply that principle to davening. Why not? Because when the tzibur davens, you have both virtues. And he would then not point to the shliach tzibur as the main thing. Therefore, he's got to say his opinion by shliach tzibur. Clear? Now, the other way you have to argue. If you say your opinion by davening, by shliach tzibur, and even in the case where there's reason to say that no, but the community has also the virtue of quality, harmony, as we said. And you still say no, the main thing is the shliach tzibur. For sure, he would say that when it comes to the Beis Medrash. So why would he have to state his opinion there? Now we're going to explain that. Be clear where we're going? Yes? On the other hand, if you only say his opinion when it comes to davening. So first of all, it has to be said in the case of Beis Medrash because of the Chachamim. I might think Beis Medrash, I might think that the Chachamim would agree to him over there. Only when it comes to davening, they say the main thing is what the tzibur, because of the community voice. When it comes to learning, you've got to be the real deal. I might think that. I might think they would have agreed with him there. So therefore, they have to say their opinion there. That's for sure. That's in the brackets. So again, I might think that in the case of the story of the Beis Medrash, they would agree. So therefore, they have to state their opinion there. But it's also true for Gamliel. Even Gamliel has to state his opinion where, by the story of the Beis Medrash, I would not deduce it from the argument about davening. And I might say davening, he does accept the tzibur, the main thing. I might say by davening, on the contrary, that's what the shliach tzibur is. He stated his opinion there, but I wouldn't apply it to the Beis Medrash. And I might think he will let everybody in, and it's different. Why? The other way now. The Beis Medrash. Why? Because it comes to Torah study. It says in Pirkei Avos, how do you acquire Torah? It's through debate. It's through argument. It's through having colleagues and through discussion. The Adrab, on the contrary, the more voices, the greater it's going to deepen the understanding. One learns more from one's students than if one learns on one's own because of the questions that are asked and the teacher is challenged. So it compels me to understand it deeper and clearer and articulate it clearer. It becomes clearer for me. I might think, Shekol Shiba Talmidim, the more students, Gamal Talmidim she'ein teichem kabara. I'm thinking when it comes to learning, we don't care about quality there. Davening, yes. Davening, you want the shliach tzibur, that singular voice, as we learned last week. The shliach tzibur has to be a person that's beyond reproach, and he has to have a nice beard. That's what it says. We say this in the Chazan said this explicitly at Hashana Yom Kippur before he starts the Musaf. He's the main Chazan, and he pleads before God and says, I'm not worthy. And the Chazan has to have all of these virtues, and I don't have them.
There are some shuls that don't want a Chazan that appear.
Yeah, it's from the Gemara. It goes back to the Gemara. But that's the least thing. The main thing is his character is still in character. He has to have a nice voice, all of these things. So therefore what? There, Rabbi Gamliel says, yeah, the main thing is the shliach tzibur. When it comes to learning, the more voices, the better. Therefore, he has to state his opinion, even in the story of the Beis Medrash, right? So now we've explained both ways why, even though in general it's the same principle, they're not the same. There's a reason to differentiate and say one case is not similar to the other. And if the argument is only stated in one case, we would not know what they hold in the other case. Neither Rabbi Gamliel or the Chachamim, for the reasons we just explained. The Rebbe adds now, is this clear? A beautiful thing in the brackets. So I guess in summary, let's just zero in on this so we don't get confused with all of it. Why do we have to hear Rabbi Gamliel's opinion in both scenarios? Why, if he tells us that the main thing is the shliach tzibur in davening, then for sure I would deduce, because he's looking for quality. so absolutely and so uncompromisingly, surely he would also say that any student, the Beis Medrash, has to be held to the highest standard. The answer is he might not say that when it comes to learning, because learning is about debate, and the more opinions, the better it is. So he's not a tzaddik. So what? He has an opinion. Let's hear it, and it's going to help us get to the bottom of the subject and clarify. Davening, it's all about the purity of the heart. So davening, what's the main thing of davening? The shliach tzibur is the purest member of the community. That's when we tout the virtue. Learning, what's important, what your level is. I might think. Therefore, you have to state his opinion. No, he holds, even when it comes to learning, if he's not the ideal student, he should not be admitted. Now, the Rebbe adds in brackets, further argument why I would draw distinction. Another reason why I would draw distinction that I might think that Gamliel would admit everybody, even though he holds the shliach tzibur is the main thing in davening, but it comes to learning, comes to the yeshiva, everybody's admitted. This is going to talk to all of us, I'm sure, that have children. And from the perspective of Musa, which means an ethical message, we could suggest and add the following to our argument. What's Torah? Torah is Melashon Hayirah. Torah is instruction. The Hayirah is to instruct the person how a person should conduct himself. I would therefore think, I would logically say, that yeshiva is not just for the elites. On the contrary, they need it more. They got to be schlepped into the yeshiva, whose inside is not like their outside. They should also know how to conduct themselves. And moreover, let's elevate them. So typical of the Rebbe here. That let's bring them to that level where their external matches their internal. They're not just coming looking the part, but they really are the part. Let's make them that way. I might think, and Gamliel says when it comes to yeshiva, whoa, there's no restrictions. Everybody in. Tefillah b'tzibur is davening. It's different. Maybe you want to look at the shliach tzibur. So it's a very...
There's no interaction.
There's no interaction. And tefillah b'tzibur is about God accepting your praise. You want the best representative. You want the singular voice. It's a whole different thing. Prayer and learning. And offering to God. You want to be the choice. I might think this distinction. Therefore, no, Rabbi Gamliel has to state his opinion, even in the case of learning. Now, Rebbe adds in the footnote, at the end of the story was, to be noted, that the end of the story was, the Gemara tells us that when they removed him from the office, and they allowed all these students to enter, that day, hundreds of benches were added, 400, 700. He felt bad. He said, maybe I made a mistake. In other words, he acknowledged that the elite kind of school that he ran, maybe that isn't the model. Now I'm going to add that it's both are necessary. In other words, everything's divine providence. He had to establish the goal. Every student should be like this. We're not talking intellectually brilliant. We're not saying inside like the outside. That's the goal. When he was removed and everybody else is brought in, like the Rebbe said, we're going to lift him to that. He raised the bar high, and every child should, on their level, her level, get to that. So what he articulated is not in vain. That's the goal. Everybody can be that. And we're not talking scholarship. He's talking about their fear of heaven, their moral standard, inside like outside. It's not IQ. It was not an IQ issue. The issue was their Yiddishkeit. So it's not in vain. It's not in vain what he did. He set the bar high, and we have to know every child can be that on their level. So they admitted them all in, remembering Rabbi Gamliel's. So fascinatingly also, even after Gamliel's reinstated, 1 week, Rabbi Elazar Azariah, they didn't close the doors then. He said, no, keep the doors open, everybody in. So I'm expressing that his position is necessary. We have to know what we can be. And then we get there. Now, also in the footnote, I want to go into there's a beautiful footnote here as follows. It's footnote 23. The Rambam says, it's a fascinating thing. Rabbi Gamliel holds, what does he hold? Well, he says the main thing is the shliach tzibur, yeah? But he still holds, there's like a contradiction. Now, Gamliel holds that when you say the Amidah, you discharge your obligation. Since we're davening with a minyan, you say the Amidah, you're Yoitza then. So, for example, you said the Amidah and you have to go. You didn't hear the Shliach Tzibur, you're Yoitza? Yes. For sure, according to the Chachamim, you're Yoitza, because the Shliach Tzibur is only there for the one that doesn't know how to daven. But according to Gamliel, the main thing of the davening but tzibur is the Shliach Tzibur. What happens if you said yours, then you were called out, you had to leave, you didn't hear Chazar Sashatz. Are you Yoitza?
But Kedusha has to be said.
You miss Kedusha, but are you Yoitza Tefillah? Are you Yoitza Tefillah? The Kedusha is a separate thing. Are you Yoitza the mitzvah of Tefillah? According to Gamliel, I think not, because the main thing is the Shliach Tzibur. Gamliel says, yes, you are. So if you are Yoitza, so if a strange thing comes out, Rabbi Gamliel touts the virtue of the Shliach Tzibur, and yet he says when you daven on your own, you're Yoitza, so you lose the whole beauty of the Shliach Tzibur. Better you shouldn't daven. Let the Shliach Tzibur daven. You'd think better you shouldn't. Or if you do, you're not Yoitza. You're just doing it so he should prepare. But you're not Yoitza then, because if you're Yoitza then, you just pull the rug out from under your feet. Now when he davens, he doesn't add anything, it would seem. And the question becomes even more perplexing when Gamliel says, you are Yoitza with your individual davening, but you're saying the main thing is the Shliach Tzibur. Then it explains in the footnote, based on this response of the Rambam, what comes out of Gamliel is this. When you daven on your own, you're Yoitza, but then when the Shliach Tzibur davens, he takes your tefillah to a whole new level. Takes your tefillah to a whole new level of a singular voice. All right? Okay. So we've explained now.
If that's the case,
Yeah.
the Shliach Tzibur has to be something special.
That halacha never changes. That's halacha for everybody. The Shliach Tzibur has to be someone that the people like. It's all of these properties. And has to be Yerushalayim, etc.
The whole year, not just Rosh Hashanah.
Especially Shonim Kippur. A whole year as well, but especially high holidays. He has to have a pleasant voice too. You know, great on people's nerves. He's got to inspire them. But that's not, the main thing is really who he is. And everybody agrees with that. In theory, that's what it is, yeah? That's where many of the synagogues failed. It's just one expression of it because it was missing the soul. Yeah, beautiful chazan and it was entertaining, but it didn't touch the soul. So people came high holidays, they were entertained. How long can you be entertained by a chazan? Especially as the Moors, people's interest in chazanas, in cantorial stuff is it's a very limited audience for that to begin with, and it's a shrinking one. So, but no one comes back. You have to come high holidays, you endure it, you entertained a little bit with a chazan and a choir, and you go home. What he's supposed to do is stir the soul. He's supposed to stir the soul, and that's a whole different davening. Childhood memory. When I was a child in yeshiva in Australia, in the Lubavitch, so I just to tell you the shul then, when I was a kid growing up, there were a handful of Lubavitches in Melbourne, literally a handful. There were 5 families, of which my mother was one. They were sent by the previous Rebbe to Australia, and the rest of the community they were many Holocaust survivors and their children, and there's some born in Australia. Today it's a different story. Community has grown, it's 50, 60 plus years later, but as a kid, so they were literally a handful. There were no Bachrim, no yeshiva students. As a kid growing up, there were 2. Then they made yeshiva gedola, and then they had sent shluchim, and everything changed. Big revolution unfolded. So the childhood memory. So for many years, it's one of those beautiful memories of my childhood. So the chazan for Shacharis was Amnochem Zalman Gurevich. When this Amnochem Zalman died, it was front page of the Australian Jewish News, like the Canadian Jewish News. Front page. In fact, the headlines were like half the newspaper. Amnochem passed away. such a beloved figure. He was the fundraiser for the yeshiva. He was the fundraiser. My father used to go with him twice, 3 times a week, raising money to pay his salaries in the yeshiva. The Rav Nachum never led the service. It was never a shliach tzibur during the year, only high holidays. Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, he davened Shachris. The Baal Musaf, now Rav Nachum, was a short fellow with a white beard. I tell you, my friends, you could not almost hear a word. He had a towel. We as children used to feel the towel. When it came to the end of Shachris, take out the Sefer Torah, go to the front, kiss the Torah, feel his towel, it was wet. He would say a word and sobbed the entire davening. HaMelech, the first words HaMelech, he barely got those words out and sobbed. And so the entire davening was, he just forced himself to say the words that we had to hear to know. It wasn't a sound in the shul, hundreds of people in the shul, not a sound. He gave expression, his sobbing to the soul, to the heart of each one of us. That was his davening. Now, the contrast to the Baal Musaf, Rabbi Groner, Nachman Zalman was this high. Rabbi Groner was 6 foot something. He was the head shliach. Rabbi Groner was a towering figure, a legend in his lifetime. I've never met anybody like him. No one ever has. And he had a voice, a booming voice that you could hear the whole city of Melbourne heard when he davened. And people would come just to hear his davening, slichas, and he was an extraordinary Baal Tefillah. Melodious, and he had the melodies that he used were melodies that he heard in the Arei Mohovim Shtibel that he grew up with in Brooklyn, Crown Heights. Then they were all Holocaust survivors. And anyway, his davening was so rich and nuanced, and the whole shul was lifted. They're very different. Nachmi couldn't hardly hear. And Rabbi Groner was a voice that when I daven Hashanah Yom Kippur, I hear him. And the Nusach uses his. Try to. Very different, but what they shared in common was the heart and the soul. Rabbi Groner was a world-class Baal Tefillah, no question about it. That's not what drew the people. Hundreds of people, not a sound in shul, from beginning to davening to the end. Every word, honey, tears, sweetness, joy. I wish that you would experience this.
It was also a period after the war.
Yeah, it was also after the war. Yeah, a broken people. But in Australia after the war, it's except materially, a lot of people made it, a lot of prosperity and so on. But still, you come to Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, and I'm sure all of them, they carried with them their loved ones. No doubt. It was a special time. Anyway, all to say that almost at 9:15. So without repeating it now, so we've explained why the Chachamim and Gamliel have to state their opinions in both these scenarios, because there's reason to differentiate. And therefore, it must be stated. Now, let's go a little bit further. We'll continue next week as follows. Chapter Ois Hey. Now, this whole question, I'm going to take it deeper. What outweighs? What's more significant? Quantity or quality? This dovetails in with, in brackets here, but it's at least similar to another debate. The Kamin Yonim in many areas of life, of Torah. In brackets, Rogad Shov Mighty was the famous Rogad Shov, Rabbi Yosef Rosen of Rogad Shov, one of the most outstanding scholars of all time. So he elaborates in many places and deals with the following issue, the debate. And that is, to be continued next week, Mahu Ikar Adov and anything. See, we're talking now, till now, quantity versus quality. And they're two separate. Here's the Shliach Tzibur, that's quality. Here's the Tzibur, that's quantity. Here's the student that's inside like outside, that's quality. Here are the students that are not, but many of them, that's quality. That same argument can be seen even in the same thing. What's that? What's the main thing? Chaymer the matter, v'geshem adover, or yatsura, or the form, shaloi. Form versus matter. What do you mean by that? So, a very simple example, we're talking about quantity or quality of a given object. To use a simple example, that it's not, what is better? To have many or a bigger, let's say, a bigger, not so, let's say a car, an example of a car. What is better? A bigger car, more engine, more power, etc., but the quality is not so great, or a smaller car where the quality is higher. Talking about the same object, what are we looking for? It's quality virtue or it's quantity virtue. And we'll soon see illustrations, that very practical illustrations in halacha, what wins the day? What should be the emphasis? What's the critical part? The quality, it's the same kind of argument, but till now, arguing separate things, 1 versus 1,000. Now, in the same thing, when you look at any object, what is it that should be, or any issue, what is it that is its primary value? Is it the space it takes up, as it were? That's the significant? Is that its impact? Or is its quality, is its impact measured in its quality, not in its quantity? This is an existential question that has practical ramifications. Let's go a bit further. So they dovetail these two arguments, these two philosophical questions. If the main thing is the chaymer, the materiality of the thing, so when you have more quantity, so the more quantity we have, then that's, if the main thing is the chaymer, then that is more important than its quality. But if we look at everything, we say it's not the chaymer, the material, rather its form. But if the main thing in everything is its quality, then the main thing is the quality. So to illustrate this, we'll running out of time. We'll illustrate this tomorrow. But I hope we just got the point here. We're talking about in a given thing, what is it that should occupy your attention? What is its main contribution? The actual materiality of it, the actual presence of it, bigger is therefore better, or is it the quality of it, not its own quantity?
You said at the beginning of it, it says, understand.
Yeah, right. So that is right. That's a similar kind of thing.
Well, technically,
The more, the better. Or in a given, but see the beauty of this argument now is in a given thing itself, looking at one thing. What are we looking at here? It's quantity or the quality within it itself, the materiality of it or its form. It'll become clear when we illustrate this in various arguments. And I just try to give a simple example.
A diamond is a very good example.
Okay.
A diamond in terms of quality. It's,
Yeah. So what are we looking for? Yeah, that's a good example. What are we looking for in a diamond? Bigger, or we'd settle rather a smaller one, but a better quality? Or, see, then we're talking about two separate things at the end. So I'm going to choose the smaller one if I choose quality over quantity. But even just looking at the object itself. So we're looking at this cup. So what's its virtue? It holds a lot of liquid. It's a big cup. Or its virtue, its design, and the way that it holds the liquid. And the way it's designed, so it's comfortable to hold, all of the properties, its shape, its color. So not just the mass of, that's the word, mass, another word. Is it the mass of something that is its primary presence, as opposed to its, no, that's talking about a cup. Anything has a mass and it has a
function.
Maybe function, a particular form, the form of the mass. What's its primary value? Its mass or its form? So in the case of the cup, so we're looking at the cup. What's its primary value? That it holds. It's a big cup of coffee. I'm looking for a big cup of coffee. I'm looking for a beautiful cup of coffee. Beautiful from its function. It has to have a handle like this. That's easy. If it's 2 fingers, 3, whatever it is, all of the things, the lip is straight, it curves, whatever, all of the shape. That's its beauty. So we'll see in halacha further, it's in the same object what we're looking at. It has both virtues. It's a nice big cup of coffee. It's a nice big cup of coffee. Now, I do want a big cup of coffee. I don't want to sip. But there's also the nice big cup of coffee that contributes to the whole experience of drinking the coffee. What is the main thing? Within the very object itself. So we'll see, God willing, that further next week.
Rabbi, Shavua Tov, everybody.
Have a wonderful week. Thank you all for joining. Good to see you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm.